Some of NATO's biggest militaries are deepening interoperability with the Philippines for the first time using, quote, real-world conditions in this year's biggest ever Balikatan exercise. The US, France and Canada join major non-NATO allies Japan, Australia and New Zealand, making a total of 7 participants with 17 observer nations. 4 nations, France, Canada, Japan and New Zealand, are joining for the very first time. And in the Bashi Channel, a tiny island in Batanes called Airspace, just over 100 miles from Taiwan, will be a location for the combined forces maritime strike exercises. China is not happy. Watch.
亚太地区最需要的是和平安宁，最不需要的是引入外部力量，制造分裂对抗。我们想提醒有关国家，一味在安全上相互捆绑，只会引火烧身，反噬自身。
Who is really threatening the peace? Why is China so worried about these nations combining? What does it say about US commitment amid the Iran war? And what has driven Japan, which is sending 1,400, not 1,000 troops, to make its most significant and bold participation this year? Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Inka Vat. To discuss this and more, I'm joined by Tony Hu, former US Department of Defense Senior Director for China, Taiwan and Mongolia. Also, we have Sana Hashmi, Taiwan Asia Exchange Foundation Fellow, and from Manila, Renato Cruz de Castro, De La Salle University Department of International Studies Distinguished Professor. A very warm welcome, Tony and Sana, and also to Renato online. But first, on the first day of Balikatan 2026, China sailed its Liaoning aircraft carrier through the international waters of the Taiwan Strait. It follows the transit of Japan's destroyer, the Ikazuchi, on its way to Balikatan, also through this sea line of communication, the major sea lane of the Taiwan Strait. However, Beijing says it has sole control over what it calls China's internal waters and claims the transit was a, quote, deliberate provocation. Days later, Beijing held what it called joint readiness patrols, Air Force and Navy drills in the East China Sea close to Japan. So, Tony, let me come to you first. So was this a provocation? I mean, does it, as China claims, let me quote you, expose the dangerous plot of some people in Japan to intervene militarily in the Taiwan Strait and undermine peace and stability?
I don't think so. In recent months, Canada, Australia, UK, France, and even Vietnam have sailed their warships through Taiwan Strait. And of course, China complained, but they didn't make a big deal of it. They're making a big deal of it this time because it's Japan. Japan is in the first island chain. Also, Japan is a key player in case of any contingencies in this region. So I think they're trying to make a big deal of it. But the fact is, Taiwan Strait is an international waterway. So this should be looked upon as the freedom of navigation sail, just like United States and other countries have done. So no, it's not a provocation.
Okay. Sana, I mean, what sort of propaganda techniques can we see that China is using? So not just about the transit of the Strait, but also about these exercises as a whole.
What China has been trying to do is to build and shape narrative. And I think this is something that we really need to pay attention to. It is framing the exercises as provocative, destabilizing, escalatory, and the so-called term that China has been using, that these countries are projecting the Cold War mentality. And also, China is citing sovereignty and legality issue, and I feel there is selected omission. When it comes to China, there's hardly any legal projection of the situation. But when it comes to other countries trying to protect their own interests, there is sovereignty and legal issue from China's perspective. But when we talk about narrative building, I think what we also need to emphasize is that how China is focusing on that China is a peaceful country versus peaceful China versus destabilizing and aggressors. And aggressors are the US, Japan, and as Tony also mentioned, that Japan is a new addition, and that is what is making, why China is making a big deal out of the exercises.
Now to the actual content of the drills. We see here a range of different exercises from counter landing, live fire to maritime strike, to air and missile defense exercises spread out over the nearly 3 weeks until May 8th. Now, neither China nor Taiwan have been mentioned, and we're told these are real-world conditions. So, Renato, let me go to you in Manila. Why are these exercises so important for the defense of Philippine and Taiwan sovereignty?
Well, for one thing, for the Philippines, it implemented its territorial defense doctrine based on what is called the comprehensive archipelagic defense concept. You also have to take note not only of the military exercises, but where those military exercises are being conducted. I was at Camp Aguinaldo yesterday, and there was hardly any American encampment, unlike last year, where you see the entire Camp Aguinaldo occupied by either the United States Marine Corps or the Army. And I asked somebody from the Armed Forces of the Philippines, they are all in northern Luzon. They are in the Ilocos, Cagayan, and even in the Batanes area. So again, this has something to do also with CADC, because CADC aims to move forward into what we call our maritime domain, of course, the South China Sea, and more importantly, of course, the Luzon Strait. And of course, part of the CADC and part, of course, of our alliance commitment with the United States is also look at the possibility of a Taiwan contingency. So every time, of course, planning for Balikatan is conducted, the Taiwan contingency is somewhere there being mentioned in the staff room.
I mean, China, the reason why China is so against Balikatan is because, you know, it feels threatened. And it feels threatened because these are deterrence and defensive exercises, you know, geared towards China's threat.
Well, it's not only deterrence. You know, when the Secretary Pete Hegseth was here last year, he mentioned this. You know, if deterrence fails, then there's also possibility of war fighting. So in fact, the Balikatan exercises are not considered simply as drills. They are considered as rehearsals for possibility of war fighting if deterrence would not work.
Okay. Tony, let's talk about the missile systems. We know that Japan is bringing its Type 88 missile, and we know from previous iterations, you know, Nemesis has been tested and exercised, Typhoon as well, and it's understood that even the Tomahawk missile will be used for the first time.
Yeah. So right now, China has the world's largest navy. So the naval component of their threat is part of the center of gravity that it has to be dealt with. And this exercise, Balikatan, tries to simulate that with anti-ship missiles, including the Tomahawk. Tomahawk obviously has multiple missions that's capable. The most important thing is Tomahawk has a very long range, over 1,500 kilometers, which will hold the entire South China Sea at risk, including China's naval base in Hainan Island. So this portion, I'm glad to see this is being exercised by all the participants, because this is the anti-surface, anti-ship aspect of deterrence against China. And if deterrence fails, winning a combat fight with China, that naval anti-ship component has to be strong.
Okay, and Tony, you mentioned, you know, that China was definitely targeting Japan. It's very unhappy that Japan is stepping up. Why is Japan, in particular's participation, so important for Taiwan?
Yeah, because I think Japan is acting now. Prime Minister Takeishi's the national security policy, and also following the previous Minister of Defense, General Nakatani's concept that this entire region from East Sea, South China Sea, Taiwan Strait, Yellow Sea, it's one theater of operation, because the entire First Island chain, we have one common threat, which is China. So it's not logical to allow China to act aggressively in one area like South China Sea and not hold them at risk for other area of China. So we should treat this as entire one theater. If they act aggressive in one area, we want them to worry about all the other area. If you do something to the Philippines, you need to worry about Dalian and Qingdao up in northern China, receiving the type of threat. So I think this is very important, and that's why Japanese participation is so important, because it expands the area where China have to worry about in case they act aggressively anywhere along the First Island chain.
Okay, and Sana, India's BrahMos missile system will also, be part of Balikatan. What we're showing now is the list of troop agreements that Manila has signed with various countries, and perhaps the UK and South Korea might be the next ones to sign those agreements. What is the likelihood that India itself could sign with Manila?
India considers Philippines as a very important defense partner, and we know India is very open about its position on the South China Sea. It actually sides with the Philippines on that. But then India's participation in the regional dynamic, specifically in terms of joint military exercises in Balikatan, is kind of restrained. India's presence, I would still say, through BrahMos is pretty strong right now. But then India's policy is just not to go and sign defense agreements like those the Philippines signing as of now. What India really focuses on is logistical agreements. India has done it with the US, and India has strategic autonomy. India has multi-alignment policies, is ardent follower of these two policies, and I think it's reflective of India's approach toward the Philippines as well. I think in the immediate term, I don't really see a likelihood, but there's absolutely a likelihood in the medium to long term. And through BrahMos, I would say that India is visibly becoming an important security player, security guarantor in the Indo-Pacific region. And indirectly, India is absolutely playing a role. And it also shows what Tony mentioned about Japan's participation and countries participating together, also including India. It shows how countries are looking for greater interoperability among non-NATO countries. And then apart from that, what India also talks about, India issue-based coalition, which is an important style of deterrence against China, and how Philippines is becoming an important major hub in that regard. So I think India's role is a little bit indirect as of now, but it absolutely has a potential to play a greater role.
Tony put it quite clearly in terms of, we have to look at the entire Chinese coast. So is that the reason why the Philippines requires, and it's actually not the Philippines, it's Taiwan and Japan as well, but needs all these external forces to be part of any preparations, as you said, any rehearsals?
Definitely. Of course, in the light of possibilities that China might effect its armed invasion of Taiwan by 2027. So what is in mind, I guess, every time we plan, especially this Balikatan 2026, is a possibility not only, of course, of a blockade of Taiwan, but also a possible amphibious operation that might happen, of course, in the northern part of the Philippines. So again, one of these exercises would involve firing missiles against a decommissioned Second World War vessel. So in a way, it's an act of what we call anti-access area denial capability that will play a very important role, just in case, of course, you have the PLA Navy passing through the Luzon Strait and possibly effecting an armed invasion of Taiwan in the Pacific. So that's in the mind. Also, of course, a possibility of an amphibious operation in the southern part of Taiwan, which, of course, would also affect the security of the Luzon Straits.
Okay. Now, Japan has not attempted to hide or soften its participation in this year's Balikatan. Its self-defense forces are showing up with a total of 1,400 troops, up from the 1,000 previously announced. Let me quote Japan's goals. It says it will use the drills to, quote, maintain and enhance joint operational capabilities, deepen cooperation, and create a security environment that does not tolerate unilateral changes to the status quo by force. The joint US and Philippines statement says they are committed to, quote, developing strong measures along with the deterrence to keep sea lanes open and not subject to arbitrary control by one country. Collective defense is critical to denying and deterring aggression anywhere in the First Island chain. They condemned China's, quote, illegal, coercive, aggressive and deceptive activities in the South China Sea, recognizing their adverse effects on regional peace and stability and the economies of the Indo-Pacific and beyond. Tony, let me ask you, do you believe that these messages, that sort of language, is it getting more pointed?
We certainly hope so, because collective defense is the best deterrence for regional security. Because once again, as I mentioned before, there's one common enemy one common threat, which is China. So individually, it's hard for Taiwan or the Philippines or Japan itself to fully deter China from acting aggressively in the region. So it requires that collective defense, and also from a coalition of friends, like-minded countries like United States, Australia, New Zealand, United Kingdom, friends who joined the Balikatan this year. So I think absolutely it's more pointed, because China knows, even though announcements there is, this exercise not pointed at anybody, but they know it's because of their aggressive action that's causing all the reaction from everybody else. So that needs to be clear, that before China started acting so aggressively, Balikatan wasn't this size. Most of the exercises weren't that size, and certainly no European participation. But it's because of China's aggressiveness that's causing this. So they need to see this, they need to understand this, and if they act aggressively, there will be a coalition of forces to conduct collective defense.
Okay, to that point, Sana, how do you characterize Japan's more assertive stance, taking into consideration current events as well as historic events?
I think Japan has become much more proactive in terms of taking a more proactive role in defending its own interest, as well as how to convince like-minded countries to be a part of this integrated defense. Tony, Renato both have mentioned about the importance of collective defense, and I think this exercise is a step towards that. And also, we have been talking about one connected operational theater. We talk about Taiwan Strait, we talk about East China Sea, South China Sea. It's not going to be a limited conflict if it's going to happen in South China Sea or Taiwan Strait. It is, as Japan has said multiple times, a Taiwan contingency is a contingency for Japan as well. So I think we also need to consider East China Sea, South China Sea is all one connected theater. Also, I think there is hardly any unsaid message about China not being talked about. The real-time threat is China. The coalition is being formed to deal with the China threat. China is everywhere, even though I think the language is very carefully phrased. It's very formulated, but China is the main message here.
Okay. Bringing Renato in. Renato, just want to get your take on Japan especially. I mean, is it sort of recognition by Japan that, passiveness is no longer an adequate response to China?
Yes, definitely. It's an act by Japan that Japan is now a normal power, a normal state. It will build up its military capability. It would, of course, develop the expeditionary capability of the self-defense force. And of course, it's more than willing to develop not alliance, but of course, a security partnership with another U.S. treaty ally. And there's also another element here, is the fact that, again, when we talk about history, the Philippines was, of course, also ravaged by the Japanese Imperial Army during the Second World War. If China could talk about Nanjing, the massacre of Nanjing, the Filipinos could also talk about the massacre, the rape of Manila. But by having Japan as a security partner, having Japanese forces here back on the Philippines after the end of the Second World War, it's also a message being sent by both Japan and the Philippines. We are not burdened by history, especially on the part of the Philippines. We are not burdened by history, unlike China or some other countries that, of course, were occupied and, of course, ravaged by the Japanese imperial forces. In the case of the Philippines, we're telling the world, we're specifically telling China, Japan is not, don't fear Japan. We welcome Japan's role as an active Indo-Pacific power. Japan of the 21st century is not anymore Imperial Japan of the 1940s.
And perhaps that China's weaponization of history can no longer work. Last week, we reported that China has reserved huge swathes of airspace in 5 zones, from the Yellow Sea down to the East China Sea, up until May 8th, an unusually extended period of 40 days, with no limit to the vertical height of airspace. Now, China also lodged a protest with New Zealand about the activities of military aircraft near its coast, suggesting that New Zealand had put commercial airlines at risk. The country responded, saying the P8A had been undertaking activities to monitor North Korean sanctions, evasions at sea under UN Security Council resolutions, and that they had already informed China of this activity. Tony, let me come to you. How do you think, first of all, do you think that there's any coincidence that this 40 days ends on May 8th, the same day as Balikatan?
Let me tell you, this is ridiculous. I've been in the military for a long time and retired from a long time, and I watched this. There has never been a military closure area for such a long time and such a large space. So I think there's a secondary purpose of it. If China really wants to use that area for exercise, and it's very difficult to sustain an exercise for 40 days. Plus, exercise in there allows foreign country to observe what's happening. If you want to maintain an area for such a long duration and test your weapon system, it might be better to test in Inner Mongolia or someplace in Western China so they maintain the secrecy. So it makes me doubtful that exercise for any military purpose is the real purpose. I worry that they might do this to test international response. Will international allow China to do this type of things? Because this type of closure area could be used to blockade an area, quarantine an area. Say, I'm going to exercise here, and you can't come in. Because if you look at that entire area, it's huge. It's north of Shanghai and also south of Shanghai. It leaves a small corridor for air traffic and ship traffic coming into Shanghai, but that area is humongous, and it's unreasonable. The duration is not reasonable. So if international community do not challenge that, they can certainly impose that in other areas. Say, hey, now the entire Taiwan Strait, because that area is larger than Taiwan Strait,
right. Yeah.
So they can say that entire Taiwan Strait is my exercise area. We cannot allow this to happen. So hopefully international community stands up and say, wait a minute.
So are you disappointed that the international community has not yet stood up?
Totally disappointed. I'm surprised that the international community allowed this to go on, because it's a NOTAM. NOTAM is international, notice to airmen. So affects all, and it's from surface to unlimited. So it's not like airliner can fly at 40,000 feet, 30,000 feet and fly over it. So it's a total closure for ships and aircraft. Like I say, unreasonable. The international community needs to challenge that.
Right. And yet, Sana, China's complaining about a New Zealand reconnaissance plane, which is on UN sort of duties. What do you make of China's overreaction?
I think it's overblown as always. China doesn't really prefer internationalization of any issue or countries coming together for collective defense. So it's absolutely, it's blowing out of proportion, but its participation is all symbolic. But at the same time, if New Zealand is coming and participating in an exercise like Balikatan, you also have to understand that even New Zealand is worried about China. So China is a real driver against these exercises. So I would say that either China changes its attitude, its assertive postures towards countries that just want peace and regional stability, or make peace with this idea that there's going to be gradual expansion and integration of multilateral security cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region. There's no other way for China to operate in the region, I feel.
Renato, do you read this as sort of like a warning shot being fired at New Zealand because it is participating, as an active party to Balikatan?
Well, in a way, also sending a message to sending a message to New Zealand. You're so far away from New Zealand. You're very active here in this part of the Indo-Pacific. So I'm sending you a message. You have to go back. The same message that China delivered to Australia and New Zealand when you have a flotilla of Chinese warships who conducted a military exercise in the middle of Australia and New Zealand. So again, this is a messaging being sent by China that don't mess with me. I have the capability to launch a strategic pushback.
Okay, so final question, Tony. So therefore, why is New Zealand joining these exercises?
I believe New Zealand has seen itself as part of the trying to participate in the security of the Asia-Pacific region, because New Zealand has seen Chinese intrusion into their sphere of influence recently, in recent years, where, for example, Cook Island And those places that New Zealand have a compact of association with, but yet Chinese intruding into it and deploying their military to it. And in addition, in the South Pacific Islands, where traditionally New Zealand and Australia have influenced, Chinese are using their immigration policy, sending a lot of people, Chinese people, into those islands and changing the demographic of those islands. So I think both New Zealand and Australia is recognizing the threat from China, that expanding into their area. Therefore, I think they also want to, I guess, show China that, hey, we can do the same in your area.
Yeah, so it's also a message from New Zealand to China.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay, we're going to have to wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Tony Hu, Sana Hashmi, and Renato Cruz de Castro in Manila. Thank you for your time today. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. See you next time.